Stamped images can sometimes look flat, but embossing glaze takes them to a whole new level. Stick around, I'll show you 3 ways to use embossing glaze that completely transform your stamping. Hello everyone, my name is Tiffany Solorio. If you are new here, welcome. We are on day 15 of 20 days of creative play, where every day we explore a new technique and experiment with our supplies. Today we're going to be using embossing glaze to make our stamped images shine. Now of course you can simply add embossing glaze over a stamped image to make it pop, but sometimes that can still feel a little bit plain. I wanted to see if I could take it a little bit further, so I tried 3 different ways to layer embossing glaze. Some were subtle, some bold, and one I honestly didn't know if it would even work. For the first technique, I'm going to be inking up this background stamp from Tim Holtz with some Distress Oxide inks. I'm using Lost Shadow, Crushed Olive, Stormy Sky, and Walnut Stain, and I am just randomly adding it to this background stamp. I'm just using some regular heavy stock cardstock. I wish I would have used some mixed media paper because I did want to spritz it with some water and kind of get a little bit of wicking going on, but because this is heavy stock, it didn't do that, which is fine. It ended up being okay. I am going to dry this, and then after it's dry, I'm going to be taking a flourish stamp and inking it up with some Versamark ink. I am using my Misty so that I can re-stamp it if I need to, and of course I felt like I wanted to add just one more stamping with the Versamark just to make sure that I get a good impression, because I am going to be adding the embossing glaze over top of this stamped image. All right, so here comes the fun part. I'm going to be adding a few different colors of the embossing glaze. I am using Hickory Smoke, Speckled Egg, and then a little bit of Lost Shadow. And because the embossing glaze is translucent, you're going to be able to see the stamping underneath once you heat it up and melt the embossing glaze. It's really cool. I am going to tap off the excess, and I just toss that. There's no need to save it, so I try to use as little as possible. I am now going to take my embossing tool and heat and melt the embossing glaze, and it is probably a little bit hard to see on camera, but I will hold it up so that you can see the effect that the embossing glaze has. So you could definitely use whatever stamps, whatever colors underneath to do your stamping, and then add the embossing glaze over top. It's such a cool effect. Before we get into the next technique, I wanted to let you know, if you want to take your embossing glaze even further, check out my mixed media foundations class happening on September 6th. We'll dive into layering color, texture, and focal points, embossing glaze included. The link is in the description box below. If you're seeing this after September 6th, don't worry, you can still grab the class as you have lifetime access to all the material and the live replay. For this next technique, I grabbed a background that had been sitting in my stash for quite some time. It was created with gel printing and oxide inks. And honestly, I wasn't sure how it would hold up since it's just on printer paper, but I decided to try it anyway because that's what creative play is all about. I started with a Creative Worship script stamp and inked it up with Lost Shadow Oxide. I wanted a really faint, almost wispy design in the background, and it ended up being perfect. Since I wasn't adding any water or sprays, the printer paper worked just fine. I made sure to dry the ink thoroughly so the embossing glaze wouldn't stick where I didn't want it. Next, I went digging into my stash and pulled out some solid leaf stamps from Dina Wakley. Honestly, I don't use these very often, but they turned out to be perfect for this technique because the solid shapes hold lots of embossing glaze. I stamped them with Versamark ink, then sprinkled on glaze colors that matched the background. Peacock feathers towards the top, fossilized amber in the middle. After I was done adding the embossing glaze to that stamped image, I melted it before moving on to stamping out more leaves on the background. Once I stamped out a couple more leaves with the Versamark ink, I'm going to do the same thing, adding the embossing glaze to match the background colors. So peacock feathers, fossilized amber up top, and then also down at the bottom, I'm going to be using a little picked raspberry, and then towards the center, I'm going to be using fossilized amber. I didn't go heavy with the powder. I tried to just add enough to cover the image without wasting too much product. I gave it a tap and shake it to move the color around, then I melted it with my heat tool. I felt like the background still needed a little something, so I stamped out a few small circles from the same stamp set. and use the embossing glaze on them too, which added a little more interest across the background. Now, because this background was made with oxides, it looked a little muted and chalky. To bring back the vibrancy, I added some distressed microglaze. Using a dome blending tool, I tapped just a little into the container, scraped off the excess because you really don't need a lot. I buffed it in gentle circular motions over the surface, and instantly the background came to life. The colors deepened and the contrast between the faint script and the shiny embossed leaves really popped. It's something you definitely have to see in person. As I hold it closer, you can see the subtle script stamping peeking through underneath the embossing glaze. This one really showed me how even a background I wasn't sure about could be transformed into something beautiful. For this next technique, I really wanted to experiment and push embossing glaze a little further. I reached into my stash again because I honestly probably have 500 backgrounds that need to be used, and pulled out one that had been sitting around. Instead of making something new, I challenged myself to work with what I had. I started by stamping a thin greenery image from Alison Balmer and covering it with embossing glaze. After melting it, I decided to take things a step further. I grabbed those same solid leaf stamps and stamped them right over top of that already embossed design. Then I sprinkled on more embossing glaze and started melting it. This was a moment I wasn't sure about. I honestly thought the first layer of embossing glaze might just remelt and disappear into the second layer, but to my surprise, it worked beautifully. The first design stayed visible, and you could actually see the fine lines of the greenery shining through underneath the solid embossed leaves. That unexpected result gave me so many ideas. This technique could be amazing for layering different stamps, combining textures, and building depth in a way I hadn't tried before. It's definitely one I want to keep experimenting with. And that's the fun of creative play. It's not about perfection, it's about discovery. Now this wraps up day 15 of 20 days of creative play, and don't forget to grab your free PDF with all 20 prompts. It's linked below. And if you try these embossing glaze techniques, tag me on social media. I'd love to see your take on them. I want to thank you so much for stopping by, and I would love to know which embossing technique is your favorite. I'll catch you all for day 16.